Hello, 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 everyone. My name is John Sierra, and I'm a Tolkien scholar, which means that I have been studying and learning about and teaching about the works of J.R.R. Tolkien for a very long time. I have been a fan of his work since the 80s, actually, and I've been studying it relentlessly throughout the years. And I am usually the guy that you can come to with any sort of question about Tolkien's work, whether it's The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, The Silmarillion, or really any of his works, or even questions about the man himself. I'm the guy that if I can't answer you off the top of my head, I'll do my best research and come back to you very shortly. If you have a question, you can always ask right in the comment section. I do not mind that. In fact, I encourage it. But if you want to be featured in a video, or even if you just feel that your question is too long or too complex just for the comment section, you can head on over to Quora. Now, Quora is a site where you can ask questions and have people who are experts in their field answer them. It is completely free. You might even already have an account since you can sign up with Google or Facebook or whatnot. And there is a link to my Quora in the description of this video. You can head there and ask me any question you want. And if you ask anything on Quora that's Tolkien related, you're going to get recommended people that you can tag to answer the question, to request to answer the question. I'm going to be at or near the top of the list, as well as some other people that are really, really great in their field as well. Many of them are friends of mine. Anyway, we have 15 questions to get through today, and just want to talk about one or two things before we get into the reading and then the questions. We're going to be reading from the Two Towers today, and I haven't actually decided which part. I'm just going to pick a random part, I think. But the channel's doing well. We are at a little over 1,227 subscribers as of this recording. The current goal, we had a goal for the longest time of 1,000 subscribers. Well, first we had a goal of 500, and we hit that, and then the goal was 1,000. Now we're setting the goal at 10,000, and I know that's pretty far out, but we can do it. And if you haven't subscribed, if you're watching this video and you haven't subscribed, click the subscribe button, click the bell, turn on notifications and all that. I don't post a lot of videos, 2 a week at the most, but I do post very good videos, I think. I put a lot of effort into them, at least, and I hope you guys enjoy them. For 10,000 subscribers, I have decided exactly what the incentive is, what we're going to do, and at 10,000 subscribers, my streams, my Tolkien streams, which are normally seen on Twitch, and then are put up later on YouTube, will be simulcast to both Twitch and YouTube. There is I could stream to them both now, but it would cost a lot of money for me to set that up, basically. And at 10,000 subscribers, I feel that I could justify it. So that's going to be at least one of the things that we're going to do for 10,000 subscribers. We might have to do something else kind of crazy. One thing that I mentioned a few weeks ago is that there's a company out there called Shirepost that make these fantastic little coins. I put it. It's back over there. I put it away. I have a coin for the Shire. It's got a willow tree on it, and that was sent to me by my friend Matt Richardson, and him and I, and as well as my friend Sid Kemp, have been speaking to this company and sort of trying to help them improve the runes and everything and the translations on their coins and come up with ideas for new ones. And as sort of a way of thank you, they are sending us the extremely rare Morgoth coins that they made, and we're basically told by the Tolkien estate that they are not allowed to sell. So these are extremely rare. It's like one of the rarest bits of little Tolkien-related paraphernalia that you could have, and the company is sending me one. And I just learned that it should be coming very soon, and I will be definitely showing it off in the next video. One thing that's cool, though, is I'm hoping to get it by Thursday, because this Thursday, if you're a member and you're seeing this video Wednesday night, that's tomorrow. If you're not a member, you're seeing it a week later. But anyway, I'm going to be doing another Hobbit reading stream in 2 days, so it would be nice to show it off there as well. And of course, we have more videos coming out for you. We have more Hobbit reading streams. We have the Council of Tolkien. We have reactions. I've done the Rankin Bass Hobbit that should be going out to members. Well, the first bit of it at least, that should be going out to members fairly soon. And there's some other things cooking. Well, let's get to a reading. I decided I wanted to read something from The Two Towers. I'm not sure which section. I think I'd like to read from the Palantir, where Pippin takes the Palantir, the Orthanc stone, and touches it and accidentally communicates with Sauron. And this leads to basically the rest of the plot. "You idiotic fool," Pippin muttered to himself. "You're going to get yourself in frightful trouble. Put it back quick." But he found now that his knees quaked, and he did not dare to go near enough to the wizard to reach the bundle. "I'll never get it back now without waking him," he thought. "Not till I'm a bit calmer. So I may as well have a look first." Not just here, though. He stole away and sat down on a green hillock not far from his bed. The moon looked over the edge of the dell. Pippin sat with his eyes drawn up and the ball between them. He bent low over it, looking like a greedy child stooped over a bowl of food in a corner away from others. He drew his cloak aside and gazed at it. The air seemed still and tense about him. At first the globe was dark, black as jet, with the moonlight gleaming on its surface. Then there came a faint glow and stir in the heart of it, and it held his eyes, so now he could not look away. Soon, all the inside seemed on fire. The ball was spinning, or the lights within were revolving. Suddenly the lights were out. He gave a gasp and struggled, but he remained bent, clasping the ball with both hands. Closer and closer he bent, and then became rigid. His lips moved soundlessly for a while. Then, with a strangled cry, he fell back and lay still. The cry was piercing. The guards leapt down from the banks. All the camp was soon astir. "So this is the thief," said Gandalf. Hastily he cast his cloak over the globe where it lay. "But you, Pippin, this is a grievous turn to things." He knelt by Pippin's body. The hobbit was lying on his back, rigid, with unseeing eyes staring up at the sky. "The devilry! What mischief has he done to himself and to all of us?" The wizard's face was drawn and haggard. He took Pippin's hand and bent it over his face, listening for his breath. Then he laid his hands on his brow. The hobbit shuddered, his eyes closed. He cried out and sat up, staring in bewilderment at all the faces round him, pale in the moonlight. "It is not for you, Saruman," he cried in a shrill and toneless voice, shrinking away from Gandalf. "I will send for it at once. Do you understand? Say just that." Then he struggled to get up and escape, but Gandalf held him gently and firmly. "Peregrine Took," he said, "come back." The hobbit relaxed and fell back, clinging to the wizard's hand. "Gandalf," he cried. "Gandalf, forgive me." "Forgive you," said the wizard. "Tell me first what you have done." I took the ball and looked at it," stammered Pippin. "And I saw things that frightened me, and I wanted to go away, but I couldn't. And then he came and questioned me, and he looked at me. And that is all I remember." "That won't do," said Gandalf sternly. "What did you see, and what did you say?" Pippin shut his eyes and shivered, but said nothing. They all stared at him in silence, except Merry, who turned away. But Gandalf's face was still hard. "Speak," he said. In a low, hesitating voice, Pippin began again, and slowly his words grew clearer and stronger. "I saw a dark sky, and tall battlements," he said, "and tiny stars. It seemed very far away and long ago, yet hard and clear. Then the stars went in and out. They were cut off by things with wings. Very big, I think, really, but in the glass they looked like bats wheeling around the tower. I thought there were 9 of them. One began to fly straight towards me, getting bigger and bigger. It had a horrible... No, I can't say. I tried to get away, because I thought it would fly out, but when it had covered all the globe, it disappeared. Then he came. He did not speak so that I could hear words. He just looked and I understood. 'So you've come back. Why have you neglected to report for so long?' I did not answer. He said, 'Who are you?' I still did not answer, but it hurt me horribly, and he pressed me, so I said, 'A hobbit.' Then suddenly he seemed to see me, and he laughed at me. It was cruel. It was like being stabbed with knives. I struggled, but he said, 'Wait a moment, we shall meet again soon. Tell Saruman that this dainty is not for him. I will send for it at once. Do you understand?' Say just that." Then he gloated over me. I felt like I was falling to pieces. No, I can't say any more. I don't remember anything else." "Look at me," said Gandalf. Pippin looked up straight into his eyes. The wizard held his gaze for a moment in silence, then his face grew gentler, and the shadow of a smile appeared. He laid his hand softly on Pippin's head. "All right," he said. "Say no more. You have taken no harm. There is no lie in your eyes, as I feared. But he did not speak long with you. A fool, but an honest fool, you remain, Peregrine Took. Wiser ones might have done worse in such a pass. But mark this, you have been saved, and all your friends too, mainly by good fortune, as it is called. You cannot count on it a second time. If he had questioned you then and there, almost certainly you would have told all that you know, to the ruin of us all. But he was too eager. He did not want information only, he wanted you, quickly, so that he could deal with you in the Dark Tower slowly. Don't shudder. If you will meddle in the affairs of wizards, you must be prepared to think of such things. But come, I forgive you. Be comforted. Things have not turned out as evilly as they might. He lifted Pippin gently and carried him back to his bed. Merry followed and sat down beside him. Lie there and rest if you can, Pippin, said Gandalf. Trust me, if you feel an itch in your palms again, tell me of it. Such things can be cured. But anyway, my dear Hobbit, don't put a hump of rock under my elbow again. Now I will leave you two together for a while. Interesting passage, of course, because this sets up the rest of the story. When Pippin contacts Sauron, and by the way, this is the only dialogue that Sauron has in the entire book. The Lord of the Rings himself only speaks directly in this scene, and it's through Pippin, who's recalling what Sauron said to him. And even then, he didn't really speak. Pippin said that he didn't speak. He was made to understand what Sauron is saying. This is the telepathic ability of the Ainur, the angels, of which Sauron is a fallen angel, and he can communicate telepathically. And he did so here with Pippin, putting his thoughts into Pippin's mind. And because he didn't question him properly, he assumed that the Orthanc stone that he was contacting, or was accidentally being contacted by, was still in Orthanc, in Isengard, held by Saruman, and that if there was a hobbit looking through it, then this must be the ring bearer, and that Saruman had come into the One Ring, and that's why he said, it's not for you, I will send for it. He sent with the Nazgul to Orthanc, and he found no Palantir, no hobbit, and no ring there. And the next time that Sauron was contacted in this manner, it was Aragorn. Suddenly, this tall Númenórean man wearing Barahir's ring and wielding Elendil's sword, and the Elisar forged by Celebrimbor long ago, showing him that the king has returned to Gondor. And Sauron makes an assumption that the ring has passed to Aragorn, and that is why he attacks Minas Tirith, and that is why there are not many orcs in Mordor, because they're out attacking Gondor, and that is why Frodo and Sam are able to get to Mount Doom pretty much undetected. They do get caught once, forced to march. They thought they were orcs because they were wearing orc armor and clothing at that point, but they did manage to get away from that as well. But anyway, a lot of interesting things in this passage. Gandalf is really interesting here because he really needs to know what happened, because this could have gone a lot, and I do mean a lot worse. What's interesting, though, is he says if you get itchy palms, meaning the urge to steal something again, to grab the Palantir, to tell him, because he says such things can be cured. I think Gandalf is very kind here because he realizes that Pippin is not in full control of himself. He'd already sort of touched the Palantir, because after Wormtongue threw it from the tower, it was Pippin that picked it up, and Gandalf took it from him. But the Palantiri, as crafts of Feanor, or at least believed to be crafts of Feanor, Gandalf certainly thought so, are very seductive, just like the Silmarils were. And and it's not that different from the One Ring in that sense of the allure. Of course, the One Ring is inherently evil, whereas the Palantiri are not evil, nor are they good. They are just tools. They could be used for good, or they could be used for evil. Anyway, we have 15 questions to get to this week, and we're going to start right here with the first question. Our first question is a quick one, but it's a good question. Were there any Ainur who joined Morgoth at first, but then repented and sided with Manwë? You don't really hear much about this. You hear about all of the Ainur being on the side of whether you would say Manwë or Ilúvatar, the good guys, and then falling. They become fallen angels. Sauron, the Balrogs and such. even to a certain extent, Saruman, he didn't join Morgoth, he didn't even really join Sauron, but he definitely betrayed Manwë. Did it happen the other way around? Yes, actually. There was Ossë. Ossë was the Lord of Storms. He was a Maiar who served Ulmo, and he created all the destruction at sea. And as a pupil of Ulmo, he was not evil, but he was destructive. And his love for destruction led to Melkor, who later became known as Morgoth, seducing him into his service. That's how he got his hooks into him, so to speak. So Ossë served Melkor for a time, but Aule had an idea that what Ossë really needed was love. So he gave Ulmo the idea to send Uinen after him. And Uinen brought Ossë back to the path of light and the service of Ulmo, and they became married. Okay, next question. Why did Sauron capture and imprison Thorin Oakenshield's father, Thrain II? Does Sauron need or want to obtain the other rings of power he created? It's an interesting question because it's one of those questions that doesn't seem to matter much on first glance, but when you think about it, it's actually quite a good question because he doesn't really need those rings. They were not created for him. Only the one ring was created for him. The other rings were created for other people. They were, originally for the elves, but then when Sauron stole them, he gave them to dwarves and he gave them to men, specifically because he wanted to control them via the One Ring. But he doesn't have the One Ring at this point, and the power in these rings is not something that's really going to benefit them, but he does start collecting them. According to Gandalf, Sauron at this point thought that the One Ring was either destroyed or just lost forever. At least until he met Gollum in Mordor. However, he was taking as many of the rings of power as he could, and Thrain's ring was the last of the 7 that he initially given to the dwarves that he could retrieve. He had 3 others, and or was it? No, he had 2 others, so this was the 3rd that he would get. There were 4 that were destroyed by the dragons. The Rings of Power don't do much for Sauron, but I think that he either thought that perhaps the one might resurface someday, after all, and then he could put these rings to use, or more likely, I think, he just didn't want anybody else to have them. The only reason they existed was for him to control the users. This wound up backfiring on him very spectacularly, as his seizing of Thrain's ring, and only the ring, because he left Thrain and his effects in his pit. He didn't take the key to Erebor, he didn't take the map, he didn't take anything off of him but the ring. That was what made Gandalf realize that the Necromancer in Dol Guldur was in fact Sauron, and that's how he got driven out of there. Okay, next question. When Saruman asked Gandalf if he wanted the crowns of the 7 kings, who are the 7 he was referring to? So it's an interesting question. It's slightly incorrect. And that is actually what gives us the answer. I did see other answers that came in saying that he might have been referring to the 7 kings of the dwarves and such, but that's not the case. Saruman did not say the crowns of the 7 kings. What he said was the crowns of 7 kings. I'm going to read you the passage directly from the book, The Two Towers. Saruman's face grew livid, twisted with rage, and a red light was kindled in his eyes. He laughed wildly. "Later," he cried, and his voice rose to a scream. "Later? Yes, when you also have the keys of Barad-dûr itself, I suppose, and the crowns of 7 kings and the rods of the 5 wizards, and have purchased yourself a pair of boots many sizes larger than those that you wear now. A modest plan, hardly one in which my help is needed. I have other things to do. Do not be a fool. If you wish to treat with me while you still have a chance, go away, and come back when you are sober. And leave behind those cutthroats and small ragtag that dangle at your tail. Good day." He turned and left the balcony. This is not the last time today that I'll be reading from this chapter, by the way. Everything seems to be related to the two towers today. So notice that when he speaks of the rods of the wizards, which we understand to be staves, or Bilbo called it a wand, but it's the staff that Gandalf carries, and Saruman carries, and Radagast carries, and such. He says the 5 wizards, as there are 5 wizards. But when he says crowns, he doesn't say the crowns of the 7 kings. He says crowns of 7 kings. He doesn't mention 7 specific kings. There are likely a lot more than 7 kings in Middle-earth, and as Saruman, in his wrath, is ranting at Gandalf. He's just spitting words about boots too large, collecting staves, and all this, getting the tower to Sauron's tower himself. And he picked a number of crowns that he imagines that Gandalf would collect. The number 7 does have a lot of important significance in Middle-earth and even in the Undying Lands. Not just 7 dwarf lords, but the 7 stars of Valakirka, of which the stars adorn the flag of Gondor, representing Numenor in the west. 7 swans led Tur to the sea. The number just comes up time and time again, so it's likely just a number that is associated with importance and significance that Tolkien just kept coming back to. Okay, next question. Given time, could Saruman have become as great a threat as Sauron? The only way that he would come close is if he claimed the One Ring. But even then, he would still be less than Sauron, for a very simple reason. Saruman, in retrospect, was pretty feeble. He did some terrible things in Rohan, but he faced crushing defeat at Helm's Deep, and he basically lost everything. He then became a petty thug running the Shire out of pure spite, and he got murdered when he couldn't stop abusing his only remaining servant. On the other hand, Sauron terrorized Middle-earth for thousands of years. Even the Witch King, I would say, was a more successful villain than Saruman was. Whether he was Saruman the White or Saruman of many colors, as he later fashioned himself, he would not become as mighty as Sauron unless he found and mastered the One Ring. And even then, he's still an incarnate. He's stuck in the body that he has. And he's much more feeble than Sauron. He would have the power to dominate others, but not the inherent great power that Sauron wields, because he's in this limited body that was given to him by the Valar. Okay, next question. So here's a question that came in from Rob Williams, who asks, what happened to the trolls who went to the gates of Minas Tirith to wield the battering ram Grond once the dawn broke, as Gandalf faced the Witch King and the Rohirrim arrived, bearing in mind that trolls supposedly turned to stone in daylight? So the trolls that Sauron used in this battle were Ologhai, and they don't have that weakness, actually. The origin of the Ologhai means troll men or troll folk. It's never fleshed out in the main text, but in the book Morgoth's Ring, Tolkien outlined that they were not so much trolls, but they were troll-like creatures that were bred from men. And they may have existed only due to Sauron's will. As such, all of the Ologhai, not just the ones at Minas Tirith, but all of them would have been destroyed once the One Ring was, because Sauron's power was now broken. He didn't have the will to keep these creatures alive any longer. The Ologhai don't speak much. They can only speak the black speech of Mordor, and this leads to the common misconception that they are mute. But they're actually highly intelligent, and they can speak. They just only speak the black speech, and only when they feel it's necessary. They are not harmed by sunlight, so the sunlight breaking would not kill them. Those specific trolls, I believe, were rooted by the forces of Gondor, specifically Imrahil's forces. Okay, next question. How did Morgoth arrive in Beleriand? So, like the elves that came over, like many of the elves, I should say, that came over, not all of them, he walked across the Helcaraxa. The Helcaraxa is the part of the ocean to the north that is icy. and thus you could walk from the very northern part of Aman to the very northern part of Middle-earth, and then straight to the south of that was Beleriand. Morgoth and Ungoliant absconded to the north after destroying the two trees of Valinor, and they were being pursued by Tulkas and Orome, the two of the Valar, and Tulkas and Orome lost sight of them. So they passed to Middle-earth across the Helcaraxe, which the host of Fingolfin would later use to travel to Middle-earth. And it took the elves a long time, something like what we would understand to be 27 or so years, to cross what is known as the Grinding Ice. The passage of Morgoth and Ungoliant, though, was swift. They were very fast in their travel, and they arrived at a small area just to the west of Hithlum, which, due to the persistent echo of Morgoth's cry when Ungoliant attacked him, it became known as Lameth, which means Great Echo. So that's where Lameth is where Morgoth and Ungoliant, it's not directly connected to the Helcaraxe, but that's where they stopped and rested, and that's when they spoke, and Ungoliant demanded the Silmarils, and they got into a fight. Morgoth screams, and the Balrogs rise up out of Angband and pass over Hithlum and come and rescue him. But yeah, that's basically I don't know if you could even really call it walking, because the mode of travel, as it was described in the Silmarillion, almost seemed to be like they were, I wouldn't say flying, but just being pushed forward by the force of their will. That's what it seems to be. Like, I always imagined the passing of Morgoth and Ungoliant across the Helcaraxe into Middle-earth as almost being like a swift storm coming. Certainly a poetic way of looking at it. Anyway, next question. In The Lord of the Rings, what would Sauron do if he regained the One Ring and conquered every kingdom, leaving no one to oppose him? He would do exactly what you said, but it would be so much worse than that. Sauron, with the One Ring, would sweep over Middle-earth, and the realms of Imladris, or Rivendell, and Lothlorien would no longer be safe, because Elrond and Galadriel would be forced to abandon the use of their rings of power, as would Gandalf, making him more prone to fatigue in his aged body. He would drive the elves to the west, and the men would become his slaves, or they would perish. The same for the hobbits and the dwarves as well. The only bastion of safety in Middle-earth would be the small region of Eriador, where Tom Bombadil dwelled, and it's possible that Sauron may even take this land, though personally I think he would leave it alone. There would be another War of Wrath, I think. The Valar would need to send another military force, because the wizards would have failed. And we're going to actually talk about that in another question coming up too, about the hypothetical of a second War of Wrath and what that would mean. Anyway, let's go on to the next question. So I originally had the questions in a different order, but I moved this one up because it's related to what I was just speaking of. And this one came in from Ben Dean Hoy, who asks, if the Valar sent a battalion of Vanyar elves led by Ungoliant into the War of the Ring to save Middle-earth from Sauron, could they have defeated him and his army? So yes, basically yes, but it comes with a very major caveat. Would Sauron choose to fight the Vanyar elves? Would he choose to fight Ungoliant? I don't think so. I don't think that would happen if he did fight the war at that point. If he didn't just give up and hide, which is what I think he would do, yeah, he would lose. This would be a second War of Wrath, and it would be something the Valar would not wish to do, because the first one destroyed Beleriand. Sauron's forces are not as powerful as Morgoth's. He doesn't have dragons, and he doesn't have Balrogs in his employ, but Sauron is also much, much smarter than Morgoth. Sauron did not participate in the War of Wrath. He sat it out. And he attempted afterwards, after it was all over, to surrender to Eanwa. If a host of the Vanyar approached with Ungoliant, the king of all elves, if he was present, or even worse, if Eanwa himself came, like he did, Eanwa was the leader of the host of the Valar in the first War of Wrath, Sauron would do one thing, and one thing only: he would hide. Sauron is doing what he's doing in the Third Age because he's under the delusion that the Valar have abandoned Middle-earth to chaos, and that he has to step in and be the hero and save Middle-earth from chaos by bringing order. If he saw the Valar still had an interest in Middle-earth through less subtle methods than sending the wizards, and they were looking for a conflict, he knows he's not going to win that, because he's seen it happen to Morgoth. And Morgoth was greater than he. Morgoth was greater than he. And I know that there's that quote from Tolkien that people like to bring up, that Sauron at his zenith was greater than Morgoth at his nadir. But that doesn't mean that his army is greater. It just means that he himself was more effective than Morgoth was. And it's only at Morgoth's weakest versus Sauron's strongest. And in the Third Age, Sauron is not at his strongest. He was beaten up by the Akalabath. He was beaten up by the last alliance of elves and men. He lost the One Ring. He's not at his best right here. He's definitely not doing well. So even if his power was great enough to defeat the elves, which I don't think it is if a whole host of the Vanir came after him, they would send in the big guns. Eanwa he could simply walk into Mordor and grab Sauron by the neck and drag him back, forcing him to either submit to punishment or to abandon his body and hide. Either way, he's not going to get into a fight that he knows he can't win, especially because he's gotten into too many fights that he's lost in the past, and he's been defeated in direct combat by powerful kings in the past. Okay, next question. Here is the question from the thumbnail, and this comes in from Nomar Dingleberg, who asks, why is the forbidden pool forbidden? The pool where Smeagol catches the fish and Faramir almost kills him. So the fact that Gollum got into it from the outside is really the answer. The outposts that the Rangers of Gondor held were deeply kept secrets, which is why Frodo and Sam were blindfolded when they were brought there. Though when Faramir bid them farewell, he did let them leave with no blindfold, and even he accepted that he may face some sort of consequence for doing that. The fact that Gollum accessed the pool from the outside is the real reason why it's forbidden to swim in it. It's a way into Faramir's base. It's an important border that has to be maintained and defended. Gollum breached their sanctum, and they had the right to shoot him down. Of course, Faramir didn't really want to do that. Faramir was merely looking for the truth. He didn't trust Gollum, and he told Frodo not to trust this creature and not to go anywhere near Cirith Ungol, but he did let them leave unmolested. I believe that Faramir was exaggerating a little bit when he said that swimming in the pool was a death sentence, because he was trying to get information out of Frodo. He was using a little bit of exaggeration to get a reaction, and that's sort of a favorite trick that Gandalf used, and Gandalf was Faramir's teacher, so you can kind of see where he gets it from, and that's a little bit why Denethor is a little annoyed with Faramir, because he's a little too much like Gandalf. Okay, next question. Here's a question that came in by the request of Tombadil, who asks, are there passages in The Lord of the Rings that have indicated Saruman's treatment of mortal beings as inferior? Yeah, there's two of them that stand out to me. The first is in the chapter The Voice of Saruman, which I read a little bit of that earlier when I was speaking specifically about the idea of there being the seven kings. And Saruman, a little bit earlier than that, addressed Theoden, and he blames Theoden for the war that he himself started, and he urged the king to be wise. That's what he felt, and to follow him and to have peace. And Theoden said they'll have peace when Saruman hangs for the terrible things that he's done. And Saruman is quite dismissive. I'm going to read you that passage here. Gibbets and crows, he hissed, and they shuddered at the hideous change. Dotard. What is the house of Earl but a thatched barn where brigands drink in the reek, and their brats roll on the floor among the dogs? Too long have they escaped the gibbet themselves. But the noose comes, slow in the drawing, tight and hard at the end. Hang if you will. Now his voice changed, and he slowly mastered himself. I know not why I have had the patience to speak to you, for I need you not, nor your little band of gallopers, as swift to fly as to advance, Theoden Horsemaster. Long ago I offered you a state beyond your merit and your wit. I have offered it again, so that those whom you mislead may clearly see the choice of roads. You give me brag and abuse. So be it. Go back to your huts. As soon as his advances are rejected by the king here, Saruman speaks the truth and tells the king of Rohan exactly what he thinks of him and his country. Later, in the Scouring of the Shire, he adopts a similar attitude to hobbits. He took over their land, he murdered them, he enslaved many hobbits, and he did it all out of spite. He blamed them for his own troubles. I'm going to read you that passage. Quite capable, said Saruman, and more than a little. You made me laugh, you hobbit lordlings, riding along with those great people, so secure and so pleased with your little selves. You thought you had done very well out of it all, and could now just amble back and have a nice quiet time in the country. Saruman's home could be all wrecked, and he could be turned out, but no one could touch yours. Oh no, Gandalf would look after your affairs. Saruman laughed again. Not he. When his tools have done their task, he drops them. But you must go dangling after him, dawdling and talking and riding around twice as far as you needed. Well, thought I, if they're such fools, I will get ahead of them and teach them a lesson. One ill turn deserves another. It would have been a sharper lesson if only you had given me a little more time and more men. Still, I have already done much that you will find it hard to mend or undo in your lives, and it will be pleasant to think of that and set it against my injuries. So if there's any question as to why Saruman ruined the Shire, it's answered right here. Because he could. And because it made him happy. These little people with their little lives are not only below him, but he decided to make them the scapegoat for all of his troubles. Slightly after this, he looks at Frodo, and the text says he looks at Frodo with a mixture of respect and hatred. The fact that Frodo, this little hobbit, just with his words alone, earned his respect, made him livid, and because Frodo's immortal, and Frodo's beneath him. Okay. Next question. Here is a question that comes in from Mike Sherrill, who asks, what was the total number of Noldor that entered and settled throughout Beleriand in the First Age? Tolkien never gave a number, and for a very good reason. Tolkien didn't deal with numbers very often unless they were small and easily quantifiable. Examples of this would be there were 19 rings of power, because he was keeping track of the majority of them, and they weren't getting lost in the story. The same could be said for the Valar. There were 15 Valar, and they were all named, and he laid out their personalities and their traits in the Valaquenta. When dealing with larger numbers, such as the counterparts to these, the lesser rings, the Maiar, he never gave exact numbers. He let you use his imagination, but it also didn't limit him. Tolkien never told stories regarding the lesser things, but the lesser rings. But Gandalf stated that there were many. That was the word used. There were many lesser rings, and that's a very unspecified amount. That could be anything. It could be, it's more than 19. It could be 30. It could be 500. We don't know. If he had ever expanded on it, if he had written a story about lesser rings or a series of stories about lesser rings, he wasn't limited. Gandalf said there's many, and therefore he's not boxed into a specific number. The same could be said for the Maiar. If he needed to write in unnamed Maiar and introduce them to the story, he wasn't worrying about reaching some sort of arbitrary limit where he would have run out of character slots. If you notice, when he estimates large numbers, it's always something like 10,000 or more. For armies and such, which can be many things. In the case of the Noldor, you could try to estimate, well, how many ships Fëanor stole and how many elves fit on each ship, and we don't even know how many ships there were, and we don't know how big they were, or how many elves could sit on those ships, or how tightly packed they were. And even if you could figure all that out, not all the elves, not all the Noldor came by ship. Some of them walked across the Helcarax, Fingolfin and Turgon and Galadriel and a whole bunch of others. And you can't easily quantify that because he didn't give any numbers or even a sense of how many there were. So this way, at any point, he could introduce a character as a Noldor exile that he needed without worrying about Oh, did I use up all the Noldor? Anyway, next question. So here's a really interesting question, at least I think it's very interesting, that came in from Matt Wren, who asks, if Ungoliant had destroyed Morgoth, what would have been the fate of Middle-earth? Would she have had an agenda? And if so, would the Valar have needed to intervene? So destroy is a very powerful word in this case, and Ungoliant's capabilities are not fully tested in this instance, but it's an interesting thought exercise nonetheless. The fact that Morgoth cried out and called his Balrogs a sound so powerful that it rent mountains and was heard all the way in Angband from Lambeth shows that he felt he was in grave danger. The fact that the cry was so loud that it would rend mountains and yet had no effect on Ungoliant herself shows how powerful she had become after consuming the light of the two trees of Valinor. Morgoth was weakened by this ordeal, but Ungoliant was empowered. Though with her empowerment came hunger that could never be sated, leading to her eventual demise through consuming herself. So if the Balrogs had not come, or if they had come too late, what happens? That depends on how destroyed Morgoth would be. He had taken his Dark Lord form, and he would never again change his shape. He had essentially incarnated himself, as his fate upon bodily death would be akin to what happened to Saruman in the Third Age. He would become a shade. Unlike Saruman, though, they'd want him to come to the west. He's too dangerous to leave out there, even as a shade. And he'd be stuck in Mandos, this time perhaps permanently. Ungoliant would have consumed the Silmarils. And that's a problem because they would have burned her from the inside, eventually driving her insane, and she would probably die, but she would cause a lot of damage in her rampage unless the Balrogs were able to put her down. If she was able to somehow actually destroy Morgoth, a capital D, destroy him, as in he's gone forever, consume his spirit, not just his body, which is possible, I would say, considering her vast power in this moment, this would have destroyed the world. Too much of his power was tied up in the earth itself, and if he was destroyed, Arda would have ended. In this case, if it looked like that may have happened, I think Ilúvatar himself would have intervened, as the song was not yet complete. Okay, next question. So here's another language question that came in from Blair Colquhoun, who asks, does Hunlleff, which is Welsh for nightmare, well, it's probably Hunclough, is probably, if it's Welsh, it's probably the way it would be pronounced, but does that sound like something from the Black Speech of Mordor in The Lord of the Rings? I would say no, not really, no. If it sounds like any of Tolkien's language, it sounds more like Sindarin. So I'm going to put something on the screen here. We can see here the longest example of the Black Speech of Mordor that is seen in Tolkien's work, the inscription on the One Ring, Ashnaz Durbatuluk Ashnaz Gimbatul Ashnaz Thrakatuluk Achburzu Mishi Krimbatul. So we could see it represented in Fëanor runes, also known as Tangwar script, simple letters that we can understand and be familiar with, and of course my guttural interpretation of what that sounds like. You note that there's nothing Welsh or even vaguely Celtic sounding in this language, or in this small example, but the largest example we have. And note that in the entire bit, the letter E is never used, which is unusual. Sindarin is not Welsh, but it's meant to resemble Welsh in the way that it sounds when it's being spoken. Sindarin does not have a word specifically for nightmare, nor does Quenya. However, you could take Ol, which means dream, and Thu, which means bad, evil, and make something like Olthu, which could resemble the word nightmare in Sindarin. The Black Speech should sound guttural, and nasty. It's not a fair language. Unfortunately, the Black Speech is one of the least developed of all of Tolkien's languages that are used in his legendarium. The inscription on Sauron's ring is the longest example of it by far, other than that we have a few words here and there, and you can't confuse it with the more vulgar, lower Orcish dialects. Whatever the word for nightmare in the Black Speech of Mordor is, we don't know it, of course, it would not sound pretty, like Hunlleff or Hunlleff. I'm not sure exactly, I'm not a Welsh speaker, but I believe it would be Hunlleff. Anyway, next question. Here's a question that came in by the request of Bryson Rains, who asks, Frodo was unable to cast the One Ring into the fire when asked to do so by Gandalf at Bag End. Despite all that Gandalf had told him, and despite Frodo's limited attachment to the ring, Frodo was still unable to harm the ring. Nor could Isildur destroy the ring, a king with Númenorian blood still strong in his veins. Why did Gandalf, among others, assume Frodo capable of the task? And was Isildur really such a failure? Could Aragorn have done so, or was the ring's pull too strong to allow its destruction? A lot of questions in here. What it comes down to is the simple answer is no. There's only one person that Tolkien imagined as being capable of destroying the One Ring, and and when I say person, we're not counting like the Valar or Ilúvatar here. Only one person, and that would actually be Gollum. Of course, even Gollum in the story didn't actually destroy the ring willingly. He fell into the fire with the ring, but Tolkien did state in one of his letters that had he grown close to Frodo, legitimately, not just pretended, he would have done the same thing. He would have cast the ring and himself into the fire, and he would do this to spite Sauron. The only thing that could overcome the will of the ring was Gollum's hatred for its master. Isildur was very strong, and when he died, he was actually on his way to try to hand the ring over to Elrond. And the ring, in this instance, would have, I think, allowed itself to pass to Elrond, as it hated Isildur. It made itself very painful for him to touch it. However, Elrond would have been overcome by the ring too, as would Aragorn have been overcome by the ring, or anybody would have been overcome by the ring at Samath now, or if he had come to its seat of power and tried to cast it in. Why did Gandalf think that Frodo could do it? See, here's the thing, Gandalf didn't think anybody could do it, but he knew that somebody had to try. And Frodo was the one that volunteered. There were 3 people that volunteered. Bilbo volunteered, but Bilbo was too old. And Boromir volunteered to take the ring, but not to bring it to Mount Doom, but to bring it to Minas Tirith and to keep it safe from Sauron. But that was not the goal. The goal was never to keep it away from Sauron. He doesn't really need it. He wants it, but he doesn't really need it. The goal was to destroy it. And that's what Frodo set out to do. And he said, Gandalf, that is, said that Gollum would have a part to play in the end. And I talk about this a lot, the idea of patience and pity and mercy, and Bilbo sparing Gollum in The Hobbit, and Frodo saying, it's a pity that he didn't kill that Gollum, and this pity is why he didn't. And he said, Gollum will have a part to play before the end, and Frodo says he doesn't pity Gollum, and Gandalf says, it's because you haven't seen him. And when he meets him, he does pity him, and he says to Sam, I do pity him now, for I have seen him. And that pity, as well as his patience and his mercy, is what kept Gollum alive, and Gollum being alive at the end is what destroyed the ring, because only Gollum could really do it. Anyway, we're going to go on to our last question. Here's a question that comes in from the Ankit Patel, or maybe it's Patel, hope I'm saying it right either way, who asks, Melkor was created from Eru's thought. Does that mean Eru has some evil within him? So another person had answered this by the name of Stephen Tempest, and he wrote about how Elrond said in The Lord of the Rings that nothing is evil in the beginning. And I don't want to just copy what Stephen said. I just want to say that Stephen was correct. But I want to speak more specifically about, not so much about Elrond, who was talking not about Melkor in this instant, he was talking about Sauron. But he was correct that nothing's evil in the beginning. And I want to speak more about Melkor himself. Melkor was not created to be evil. He was created to be mighty. And like all of the Ainur, he had free will. The creation of Ea and Arda, it's the universe and the world, in and of itself was a lesson for Melkor, that he is not God, that despite his might, he has no power that does not come from God. Melkor's rebellion started in the Ainur, the song of creation, but the seeds of it were sown before then. He was impatient, and he lamented the lack of life in the void. He wished to create, and to fill it with things of his own thought. But he lacked the secret fire. He was also drawn not to darkness, but to light. He was drawn to Varda, and later to Arien, both of whom scorned him. In one version of the tale, when Arien would not be his bride, he attempted to ravish her. And in one draft he actually did, but she burned him, making him ashen. Melkor felt that with might came entitlements. He could take what he wanted, create what he may. The lines that God spoke to him could be boiled down to, there is nothing you could do that is not my will. Now, this doesn't mean that evil is the will of God. What it means is that evil serves its purpose. Ulmo, at one point, lamented the bitter cold that Melkor had brought to the world, and Ilúvatar, the almighty god, stated that while the bitter cold seemed a hindrance, to look for the beauty, that the bitter cold created snowflakes, beautiful crystals that were each unique. Melkor was evil for the sake of being evil, but everything he did created something good. He made danger, and this created courage. He made cold, and this created snow. He cast down the light, not once, but twice, and thus the sun and the moon were born. His rebellion proves that his might only comes from his creator, and that in the exact words of God himself, "And thou, Melkor, shall see that no theme may be played that hath not its uttermost source in me, nor can any alter the music in my despite. For he that attempteth this shall prove but mine instrument in the devising of things more wonderful, which he himself hath not imagined." Evil cannot truly comprehend good, and Melkor never understood the beauty of creation. He just wanted to ruin it, despite being told right from the get-go that it was not in his power to do so. Whether or not he learned his lesson in the end is up to debate. I would say that he probably, at some point, must have learned his lesson, or maybe in Tolkien's mind, he still had yet to learn his lesson. But yeah, Ilúvatar, God, did not create Melkor to be evil. He did not create him to be antagonistic. He did not create him to ruin the world. He created the world to prove to Melkor that his rebellion was pointless and that he would lose in the end. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I had fun doing this episode. I will see you guys next week. If you've gotten through all of this and you haven't subscribed yet, I really ask you to do so. Hit the subscribe button, hit the bell, turn on notifications, all that happy stuff. Make a hobbit happy, as they say. Nobody says that. And consider membership. Membership is very cheap. It gets you the ability to watch the videos early, sometimes only a week early, sometimes even more than a week early, depending on what they are. Each question and answer video, though, you will see a week early, and it really helps me out and helps support the channel and keeps me going here. So we'll see you guys next time.